The question I would sort of pose regarding the dogmatism is, does it follow rationally, the golden rule or Kant's universal, does it follow that if I don't want something to happen to me, or I don't want it to become a universal rule, that I shouldn't do it in a particular circumstance? I'm not sure that it does rationally follow, and I think it is dogmatic to take that leap from one to the other as sort of a universal position.
I don't think it's a universal position. So that's why I think the golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated, is complemented by the platinum rule of treat others how they want to be treated. I'm not advocating for dogmatism or absolutism or universalism. I think the principle of just because you don't want it to happen to you, you shouldn't do it to somebody else, because that could have consequences in itself, to me seems reasonable. It seems something based on reason.
Welcome to the Mindform podcast, where we delve into the minds of some of the most interesting people on the planet, discuss psychology, philosophy, and personal growth, and share the wisdom we uncover with you. Join us as we explore the art of forming our minds. Here's your host, Frank Lawton.
Kia ora from New Zealand. Welcome to the Mindform podcast, an extension of the Mindform collective and training platform. This podcast is similarly a space dedicated to exploring and altering psychological landscapes together. In each weekly episode, I'll speak with a new guest, generally members of Mindform, to extract wisdom, refine ideas, and collaborate on the game of architecting our minds. Although this week is a special episode, so I'll be mediating a discussion between two prominent Mindform members, Ryan Bush, founder, and Mufakhrul, a founding member. And these two have challenged each other on the topic of morality and ethics a number of times on Mindform in the chats and the comment sections. So now we're giving them a chance to go deeper live. My job will be to clarify, translate, and tease apart their respective views, allowing listeners to see which position you buy into and maybe help these two to learn from each other, change their minds, or find some middle ground. And we've already got Ralph in the chat. Hi, Ralph. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's just start with, just to get the ball rolling. How about Mufakhrul? You go first. Just tell us in a couple of minutes what your general position around the workings of morality and ethics is.
Yeah, so I don't want to tread too much on what Ryan has to say, so I won't reference what I think his position is, because I don't know what it is fully. But morality for me is just a guiding set of principles that I use in life to do the quote unquote right thing. I don't necessarily believe in absolute rights and wrongs, but I do believe that some decisions are better than others, and morality guides us to those better decisions. The principle that I use primarily, not all the time, but just as my go-to way of thinking when it comes to morality, is morality based on duty, as opposed to something like virtue or something opposed to the consequences of an action. So, and that involves acting on a set of predefined principles. Some people call them laws, some people call them imperatives, but I prefer to use the word principle because it's a bit more flexible. The origin of morality depends on sort of like what kind of morality you subscribe to, be that virtue, consequential, or duty-based. I believe that you can derive morality from reason. So morality is subjective as opposed to something objective in the universe. It's something you could argue is created by consciousness. So it makes sense to me that you base morality on logical thought processes and reason, as opposed to appealing to something outside of yourself, be that God or nature. And that pretty much sums up my position when it comes to
Awesome.
morality.
Okay. You go now, Ryan. Tell us what you reckon.
Yeah. Well, first, just want to say I've been really excited about this conversation. Mufakhrul and I have been having civil disagreements on Mindform for a long time, so it's cool to actually have a live conversation here on one of these topics. So my understanding, I think, overlaps a lot. I would say the way I use these terms is ethics for me is sort of the broader field of inquiry and considerations regarding what one should do, how one should live, act, behave, right? And morality is sort of a particular vision, a subset of ethics. So within ethics, for example, the ethics being like one of the core branches of philosophy, you've got the question of whether you're a moral realist or non-realist. And it's still ethical considerations if you're a non-realist. But morality specifically, I see as referring to a particular vision of ethics, which says that there are, rights and wrongs that are more or less universal, right? Things that are simply right to do or wrong to do, regardless of your personal motivations or goals. And my ethical framework personally is sort of non-moral, and it doesn't center so much around there being rights and wrongs as there being certain things that we inherently care about, values, virtues, these ideals that we are sort of evolved and born and innately value and care about. And then there's wisdom, which is sort of the reasoning capacity for figuring out the means and the ends toward those things that you care about. And so I personally sometimes say I take a wisdom approach to ethics as opposed to a moral one. But I think even at this point, we've already got some differences in how we understand these concepts. So I'm interested to see how we can reconcile them and get on the same page.
One point of distinction that I'm seeing between you two is, Mufakhrul, you said that, God, almost given that morality is subjective, not objective, which seems to be, in some sense, a take that you guys both have. You say that, therefore, we should use reason to make moral decisions as opposed to appealing to something external like God or nature. And it sounds like, Ryan, you are referring to something external like nature when you refer to we have innate drives, we have innate kind of desires, values within us that we perhaps don't reason our way towards, but encounter, discover. So yeah, Mufakhrul, would you say that Ryan is kind of appealing to something external, and do you see that as a contradiction?
I can't.
Yeah,
speak
you
for
go.
Ryan,
You go
so
ahead,
I think
Ryan, on
Ryan's
that
the best
then.
person to answer that question. Yeah. So
I wouldn't have framed it that way. I wouldn't call it external because it's all contained
Right.
within our minds, right? I'm not suggesting there are mind independent truths about, what we should care about or value. It's only because of what we do already value subjectively that we can then sort of move down the chain and reason about what the best action to take is to realize and embody those values and bring them about in the world. So I'm very much on the same page that we use reason in our ethical considerations, but I don't think there are any sort of ethical truths built into the very structure of reason, as someone like Kant would have argued. I think we are just sort of born with these values which are beyond reason in many ways. There's no rational way to deduce that you should care about humanity and benevolence. You simply do or you don't, and then you use reason to figure out how to get there.
Right. And is that your stance, Mufakhrul, that we innately have these values that we then use morality to navigate around or through?
yeah. So I think broadly speaking, so like Ryan mentioned that we're born with values. I find that difficult to get my head around because like we're a social species. We're born into families. We're influenced. We're nudged, to use a behavioral, economical sort of like parlance. We're constantly influenced by environment, by other people. So the notion of being born with a certain ideals and values ingrained with us seems a bit counterintuitive to me. So the response I would make is sort of like animals born with values are sort of like beings that are less conscious than us, born with values. I don't think they are. I think we're a special species in the fact that we're conscious, or the most conscious, shall we say. But, we can't get into the minds of other animals. But we seem to be operating on a higher level of consciousness. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Ryan's taken that is. If we are, as humans, are born with a certain group of values, why not animals? Other animals? Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. So first, regarding just kind of an empirical take on humans being born with values, I would say there are sort of two sources that I would draw from. One is just studies on infants that find that there is a kind of an innate reaction that babies have to unfairness, for example, and harm being caused to others. Unless they're like a psychopath, they have a rare set of genes. We do see that they do seem to innately care about these things. The other is cross-cultural studies that have been done that show that pretty much every culture around the world, even those that have had no contact with others, seem to value certain traits, even though there is some variation between cultures. There is a sort of universal core. And so these cause me to believe it's more likely that humans do innately value certain things. I agree, we're a social species, we're influenced, we're shaped in many ways. But the question I am left asking is, if we do acquire these values after birth, if we do have to be taught them, on what grounds can we say that they are right and not just an arbitrary tradition? Because we're essentially finding out from someone else that we should care about something.
Right. So what I would say to that is any action from a duty-based ethics position obviously has consequences, and you use the principles to imagine, and you use a sense of empathy to imagine that if the action that I'm doing right now, if that became an action that everybody did on the planet, what would the planet look like? And would I want to live on that planet? If the answer is no, then you don't follow through on the action. That doesn't necessarily mean the action is right or wrong. It's just, it's the most beneficial for you if, as a social species, other people see you. And if you're doing something like stealing and there's a short-term benefit for you, then someone else is going to steal for you as well. But if everyone stole from everyone else, it would rapidly decline into a quite chaotic society. And the second one and this gets more into the sense of right or wrong, is in terms of using people as a means to an end. So any action that takes away a person's sense of autonomy or ability to reason fully is an action that, again, isn't necessarily right or wrong, but would you like that to happen to you if the positions were reversed? So an example would be, say, a kid was some money from their parents to buy a games console, and they lie to their parents and they say that I'm going to buy a Mindform subscription instead. And the parents say, "Oh, what's this? This looks quite interesting." And the kid gets whatever it is for $200 or whatever it is to put towards the subscription nominally. What the kid's done there is take away that person's autonomy. So they've made a decision based on incomplete information, and that's taken away their autonomy. If you gave them more information, they would be able to make the choice more fully. And, you could argue whether or not taking away someone's autonomy is right or wrong, but taking someone's ability to make an informed decision based on the act of lying is something that, if the roles reversed, you wouldn't want to happen to you. So my position of duty-based ethics has a lot of sort of like the theme of reciprocal action. If what you did was applied to you in the opposite direction, would you like it? It's kind of variation on the golden rule, like do unto others as you would do to yourself. And the progression from that golden rule is then the platinum rule. Again, we're getting into the language of principles and laws and imperatives. Treat others as they want to be treated is another principle that you can use as well. So that's the platinum rule. So it's less about right and wrong and more about, you can see from the examples that I've given, it's a lot has to do with social interaction and optimizing the amount of social cohesion and ability for society to function properly, as opposed to notions of right.
Yeah, it sounds like like what you're referring to could exist as another layer on or an extension of Ryan's framework, right, where we all have these innate values and there's some degree to which those are shared across cultures, as Ryan mentioned, and these are just simply systems or ideas we come up with to account for that, in combination with the fact that, we're a social species, we copy each other, we live in communities. So perhaps it's the case that, the fact that we collectively value freedom, equity, well-being, whatever it is, means that because we live in a system, because we live in a social structure, these imperatives help us as individuals and as a collective to achieve those values that we kind of inherently value. So that, that sounds like a lot of agreement to me. Is there any part that you see as challenging or different to your own view, Ryan, and what Mufakhrul has just shared?
Yeah, so I certainly agree with the emphasis on consequences. So, for example, we may not innately understand, we may have incomplete information, as you said, about the consequences of our actions for those around us and for humanity at large, right? And the social collective, right? And I certainly agree that, the reciprocal altruism and the universality, that's one sort of component. That's one reason why we may be motivated to take one action or another. The question I sort of end up with is, I don't think it necessarily follows that because I wouldn't want something to happen to me, right, that I shouldn't do it to someone else. I mean, there are many cases where my personal ethical reasoning would lead me to converge with that sort of moral intuition that we shouldn't do something harmful to others. But I think we should reason our way to our actions based on our motivations and the context and what we innately care about, as opposed to adopting rules that other people tell us we should care about. I think to the extent that you already care about the good of the collective, you'll be motivated to learn the most effective strategies for serving it and the most effective views on what is true about the world. To the extent that you don't care about the good of the collective, I don't see what teaching could do. I don't see what conditioning could really do to make you care. I think the only place that education could really come into play here is teaching you more effective means for realizing what you already care about. If that makes sense.
Do you see rules like, or imperatives like the ones Mufakhrul specifically mentioned? Do you not see that as a form of, of that kind of wisdom where, people who are learning to act morally can utilize these tools of principles, rules, imperatives to help themselves to make moral decisions aligned with their own values when they might, especially, say, young people who are still kind of figuring out the very long and deep complexities of human interaction and consequences, seems, I guess, a fast way to get there.
Great question. So I do tend to see, and sometimes I put it this way, that morality is training wheels for wisdom. And there are sort of two views on that. If that's the case, which I'm not sure Mufakhrul would agree that morality is best seen as training wheels for wisdom. But if it is, the question becomes, is it a good thing, right? Are we helping people cultivate wisdom by teaching them rules and heuristics first, and then letting them build from there? Or are we actually holding them back and delaying the cultivation of their own, wisdom and reasoning by teaching them these dogmatic rules that they may never learn to transcend? They may just follow them as they are, and never learn how to think for themselves about means and ends of actions, right? And their own sort of ethical frameworks. And I would say I'm sympathetic to the idea that it may be necessary for some people who just, for one reason or another, lack the inclination to reason for themselves about what actions they should take, to just give them rules. I'm sympathetic, but I actually lean the other way. I actually think it'd be better if we did away with the rules entirely and taught people more effectively how to get in touch with their own values, identify what they care about, and to reason about the means for embodying them, right? Learning about the external and internal consequences of their actions and how they're actually violating their own values when they take certain actions and not others.
What do you reckon, Mufakhrul? Do you think that morality is training wheels for wisdom?
I think it could be perceived that way, and I don't necessarily have a problem with it being phrased that way, because perhaps training wheels are necessary. So, just a few things. You might have to remind me what the original question is, because I'm about to go on a little bit of
Go for it.
A ramble addressing some of the points that Ryan brought up. So the two, I'm basically talking about two sets of principles as opposed to a whole sort of like an extensive list of rules that you should follow. And one being, if I did X, what would the world look like? Do I want to live in that world? And also, by doing X, am I taking something away from somebody else? Right? And, whether that be autonomy for information and stuff. I don't see those as dogmatic, because I use them as first principles. It's the first question that you should ask before considering an action and whether or not it's moral or not. And I know there's some resistance. I said some resistance from Ryan, who is obviously a free thinker. People do get lost in dogma and the need to conform and not question their actions because that's the way my previous generations did it. That's the way it's always going to continue. It has a tendency to get into, these people think differently from us, therefore, because they think differently, they are quote unquote wrong. But because the principles I used are fundamentally, I like to think of as empathetic principles. It's considering the other quite often, and it's based on reason, as in, is with our action, if the traffic was flowing the other way, would that benefit me or not? That seems to be reasonable, as opposed to dogmatic or conformist. It's But I can understand that, why stop at those two principles? Why not just have a ton of them? And that's what a lot of societies I tend to go down to. And then people get caught up on the minor rules as opposed to the overall principles and things. I mean, not to talk about too much about religion, but you think about the overall arch of world religions. People get bogged down on whether or not they can do something on a particular day and at a particular time, as opposed to the overall principle of, say, forgiveness or justice, or the broader principle of it. I think morality being training wheels for wisdom is an interesting way to look at it. But the thing with wisdom is wisdom tends to come with experience. It's not something that you can just pick up just in an afternoon. And what morality does, it puts in that framework where you initially ask a question, and it stops you from doing something that could be unbeneficial for you before you've had to make the mistake necessarily. Because like the people with the most wisdom tend to be people that have made quite a few mistakes in their life, right? Someone who's never made mistakes in their life doesn't tend to be particularly wise, because they've got no frame of reference in terms of, that was a bad decision. Morality is training wheels for wisdom. Yeah, perhaps, but perhaps it's necessary. I mean, children haven't lived a lot in life. You wouldn't expect a child to be as wise as an adult when it comes to how to navigate life and the rights and roles. Oh, I see Ryan shaking his head there a little bit. But I might have misread something, so I'll just carry on. So the child needs a set of easy to follow rules, quote unquote rules, principles, in order so they don't, an extreme example, in order so they survive, in order so they can survive to make more mistakes and build up that wisdom. If that morality doesn't exist, the possibility of them, for example, stealing from someone they perhaps shouldn't steal from, who happens to be someone that can do them physical harm, right? Because unknown to them, that's what the person's capable of, right? If they go around with the general rule, I don't want to steal from anyone because I wouldn't want someone to steal from me, that morality is somewhat protective. So later on in life, when they've learned to gauge people a bit more, they can actually make that informed decision on whether or not it's actually worth stealing from this person. Right? It's the first principle. It's not necessarily an absolute rule. Because in some circumstances, for example, when you're starving and you have to feed your family, perhaps it's morally acceptable to steal. I would actually say it would be, because there's some things in the hierarchy of values that I value more highly. So it kind of feeds into what Ryan's saying. So to come back again, morality is training wheels for wisdom. Yeah, that's fine. I think it's necessary.
Just to dig into this training wheels metaphor a little bit further, it seems like the morality that you're referring to, Mufakhrul, might be, or you might be suggesting that that's slightly different to the morality that Brian is saying could be, does it really help? Does it get you any closer? And you referred, does morality have to be dogma? Not necessarily, right? And the two rules you present, I could see those as not being ways of kind of closing off thinking necessarily, but actually they're logical, and they're complex as well, really logical tools that just help people to kind of navigate the landscape of social complexity and empathy, right? Where it's like, okay, say you're trying to get to wisdom, going off sort of Ryan's framework, you're trying to get to wisdom, you have innate values, and the goal is to just make the best decision to actualize your values because that's what you want to do, right? Perhaps encountering these and even having them enforced or strongly encouraged early on in life allows you to just have tools that you can use to answer those questions. Okay, well, this is what I value. How do I make it work? Well, I remember hearing that, if I do something that would have that I wouldn't like it if everyone did it, that I shouldn't do that. It's. I can see. You say wisdom comes from experience. Well, a lot of these rules that we have come from many people's experience accumulated together, right, and integrated, and so it's kind of, just like any kind of wisdom, it really helps to go off what the experts say, so to speak. Why? Maybe I'll pose the question to you, Ryan. Why would it sometimes be impairing, I suppose, to your wisdom to use rules and imperatives supplied by others, and when would it otherwise be empowering to your wisdom? What makes the difference there?
Yeah, so first, I think you're right that wisdom generally comes from experience, but I don't agree with the assumption that you have to make all the mistakes yourself in order to acquire wisdom. I like to fancy myself as a pretty wise person, and part of the evidence I have of that is the fact that I haven't made a lot of the common mistakes, the fact that I've observed other people making mistakes, sort of anticipated the own consequences, the consequences in the world and the consequences in my own mind for doing certain, actions, and saying, no, I don't need to try that for myself. I can already see where that's going. So to me, more wisdom means you have to make fewer of these mistakes. And the sooner you start developing that wisdom, the better. I would say, wouldn't it be better if people knew why they weren't stealing, right? For example, wouldn't it be better if we taught people as early as possible the various reasons, both due to, you might be stolen from in the future if you steal from someone, you might be caught or punished, right? You might feel bad about it because you already value respecting other people's property, right? There are a number of reasons why this may not be a good idea. And so to me, understanding those reasons is better than just memorizing. I think stealing to feed your family is a great example that you gave of that exception, right? I mean, if someone really learns and gets these rules instilled in their head, what if they really don't steal to feed their family and their family just starves to death because they've said, no, it's wrong, I can't steal, as opposed to understanding as early on as possible. And I would even say, like, trying to answer a child's questions about the reasons why you may not want to do this, rather than just telling them early on that you shouldn't. The question I would sort of pose regarding the dogmatism is, does it follow rationally, like the golden rule or Kant's universal, does it follow that if I don't want something to happen to me, or I don't want it to become a universal rule, that I shouldn't do it in a particular circumstance, right? I'm not sure that it does rationally follow, and I think it is dogmatic to take that leap from one to the other as sort of a universal position.
I don't think it's a universal position. So that's why I think the golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated, is complemented by the platinum rule of treat others how they want to be treated. So and there's a dynamic between the two. I think the dogmatism that you see in sort of like any sort of ideological fundamentalism is something to be avoided, because it suppresses free thought, it suppresses critical thought, and I'm not advocating that at all. What I'm advocating for is a initial set of principles that you use to make sense of a situation that perhaps you don't know what the consequences are if you take the alternative path to the imperatives that I've mentioned. The the more I talk about it, perhaps your analogy of the training wheels makes sense. So if those training wheels aren't there, you are learning to ride the bike that is morality without having proficiently built up the skill level to do it. So you'll end up landing on your rear quite often, and in extreme examples, perhaps you won't get back up again. So I'm not advocating for dogmatism or absolutism or universalism. I think the principle of just because you don't want it to happen to you, you shouldn't do it to somebody else, because that could have consequences in itself. You are kind of speaking for that other person. It kind of contradicts Kant's second imperative, right? Which, you're taking away that person's autonomy, right? I don't want it to happen to me, so I'm assuming they don't want it to happen to them. But that's where the second one comes in. Second imperative comes in terms of, am I taking anything away from that person by doing or not doing? Because inaction is a form of action. Not doing something, am I taking something away from that person? So I don't see in those two principles, those complementary principles. I don't think there's that they may seem like some contradiction between the two, but I think they balance each other. I think they feed back on each other, so you are constantly iterating towards the best action, and that to me seems reasonable. It seems something based on reason.
It seems like, well, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems both of you would agree with the sentiment that it's a process that could use some support and some facilitation, developing your own wisdom, developing your own morality, building to a capacity where you could make the best decisions according to collective values or your own, right? Would you guys both say that you think that's I guess something that we need to foster in people who are developing wisdom? Would you, Mufakhrul? Yes? Cool.
I was having a hard time following. So
yeah, I'll repeat the question. I'll slightly rephrase the question. It seems like you both think that that it's worth having systems, tools, support, whatever ways of helping people to develop morality, right? So, the training wheels might be moral rules, principles, imperatives. Ryan didn't seem to challenge the idea that, you want to, I suppose, facilitate the learning of morality. Perhaps the difference is that Ryan has a different framework that he would suggest, or a different approach that he would suggest to supporting people to develop morality. I guess, if you want people riding the bike, Ryan, but you don't agree with the particular training wheels of moral principles, imperative or rules, how does someone get to riding the bike? Because my understanding, and maybe one or both of you would disagree with this, I'm keen to know actually, but my understanding is that if young people don't ever have these conversations about morality, if they're not facilitated by reading or conversations with adults, or the language that's used in their context, if they aren't supported to think about these things, values, morality, ethics, then they're going to have really impaired ethical and moral functioning and behavior in their life. What do you reckon, Ryan?
Yeah, so I was gonna say I'm thinking we're really not too far apart on this point. I mean, we're basically at two different points on a spectrum of how useful the training wheels are at this point. I think I lean towards thinking that you would more quickly learn how to ride the bike if you just start riding the bike and you have someone there helping to teach you how to ride the bike, as opposed to sort of adopting this crutch that might get in the way of it. And so I guess my questions here are, one, if I don't care, and of course I do, but if I don't care about the well-being of other people, what use is the golden rule or the platinum rule or Kant's universal categorical imperative? Can I really be taught to care about these things, or does it only depend on what I already care about and strategizing accordingly? And this is more of a potential direction we could go in terms of our visions about the right way to think about ethics. But personally, I find that Nietzsche's sort of health-based approach to striving and virtue resonates more with me, seems healthier psychologically, and potentially seems to have healthier social consequences than the more what I see as negative duty-based, compassion-based models that are all about catering to the collective good. I think that ethical behavior and pro-social altruistic behavior can flow out of an individual pursuit for virtue and excellence, as opposed to being a more duty-based, and again, I would say more of a negative, what you shouldn't do, as opposed to what you should go out and proactively do approach. I know I threw a few things out there, but it's kind of two core points. One, if I don't care, what does it matter? And two, is a duty-based ethical framework more useful than a virtue and health-based framework?
Okay, I think I followed that. So I would say that if you don't care about other people, it is totally within your own self-interest to follow those categorical imperatives. Because if you don't, you will be cast out from the social group, and evolutionarily speaking, that means death. So you may not care about what other people think of you, but they certainly do. So any action that you have that adversely affects somebody else in the group has consequences for you. And the fact that you don't care has consequences as well. So that's why I would say to that, if you don't care about not doing to others what you would have them done to you, then you may get your wish, or you may not like it. The second one, in terms of striving, this is an interesting one, and I think this comes down to how your own individual values inform what kind of ethics you advocate. So if, for example, my personal values are one of society progressing as a collective, us getting collectively better as a species, us looking after each other. So because we don't know what misfortunes lay around the corner for any one of us. So it's with our own self-interest to have built up a society where if misfortune befalls any of us, we are supported. So that involves my own values of justice, of equality. These are values that I value highly, inform my tendency to go towards duty-based ethics. Because I know necessarily that people may not value equality or may not value justice as much as me. And for me, that paints a society where there is a possibility of me having my freedoms impinged, or worst case scenario, sort of like me coming to injury or even possibly death, right? So it depends where you focus on. Is like during life, and your life experiences will kind of inform what your tendency to particular set of ethics is. In terms of striving, this isn't again, I'm just talking through my own lens, and this is the purpose of discussion, to see other people's lenses. So I'm interested to hear what your take on this is. So when Nietzsche talks about striving, what is is it possible to strive in an environment that is not conducive to you fulfilling your potential? So if you live in society that is violent, that is non-egalitarian, that is self-centered, self-obsessed, is that conducive to your ability to self-actualize? I'm obviously painting an extreme position there, but the question I would ask you is: striving as an end to itself, could that be perceived as being somewhat selfish? And does it matter? Would be the second question. So if yes or no, does it matter? So that's the question I'll throw back to you. Is striving in an end to itself, personal striving, could that be perceived as being somewhat selfish? And does it matter if it is or it isn't?
So a few things to dig in there. The first kind of centers around your point on self-interest, because if, like you said, if you don't care about the well-being of others, you at least care about yourself. And so not going around and doing antisocial actions will probably benefit you personally. I just want to sort of make clear that this sort of takes us out of the realm of what I would call moral at this point, right? If I'm making these decisions purely out of self-interest, purely because I don't want negative consequences to befall me, then it's really not a moral consideration that I'm making. And so I would say even still, our moral intuitions aren't being taught. They have to be innate to matter. It's only if they are innate that we're sort of learning different strategies and shortcuts for realizing these things that we care about. I'm not sure that there's a big difference in how much we value certain societal goods like equality and justice. I think we all care about these things. Yeah, it's true. Some people may not value those things as much as others, but I don't think that this sort of personal striving, I don't think it conflicts with that. So for me personally, I have all kinds of ambitions as a designer to work to design a better society, a better human experience. But I would say for me, that sort of flows out of my own personal purpose, where I'm sort of navigating the best actions I can take to advance my motivations. Some of those motivations are what you might call self-interested, but a lot of them do have the collective in mind. And so I am asking, well, I care about this. I care about this end goal, which is harmony in society and overall well-being. And so what's the most effective means to reaching that? I'm not sure that these rules are necessarily the best means for realizing that. So, for example, is everyone going around not doing anything to others that they wouldn't do to them? Is that a particularly inspired vision of societal or individual greatness? Right? To me, it's pretty uninspired. It's pretty flat, and it's not so dynamic and focused on realizing these high ideals so much as it's just avoiding doing anything wrong. So to me, these types of principles, while they may have a certain negative benefit of preventing the bad things, they don't really inspire the great things. And that's why this sort of virtue-based ethics puts more emphasis on striving for the great things and the ideals, both in our individual character and society, and deriving what we should and shouldn't do from that.
I'm hearing it almost seems like, have you guys heard of the phraseology of strong link versus weak link problems? Okay, I'll run over it very briefly for you, Mufakhrul. So a weak link problem is the whole strength of the chain is determined by the strength of the weakest link. So some would say that crime or morality collectively is a weak link problem, right? Where the overall well-being of the collective is determined by those who have the weakest morality or those who commit the most crime. Not saying that those two things are the same. That would be a pretty amateur take in this conversation. But and in a strong link problem, people might use music as an example. So it doesn't really matter how bad the worst music is, because no one's going to listen to it. The quality of music as a whole is determined by the quality of the best music. So in a weak link problem, you want to focus on setting a baseline of strength that is not gone, that no one falls below. In a strong link problem, you just want to foster the highest heights. Now, a theme that I've heard across this conversation, to some degree, and the training wheels metaphor is really, really perfect for this in a way. Ryan said, "I'll skip the training wheels, just go straight to it. You're going to learn a lot faster." And when Ryan said that, I was thinking, perhaps training wheels, and you did kind of refer directly to this, Mufakhrul. The purpose of that is because, well, falling on your bum a few times, whatever, but actually it can have really severe consequences. Maybe you won't get back up. Maybe something awful will happen. And so, perhaps the question here is, what are we aiming towards, right? Are we aiming towards a society that where bad stuff doesn't happen? Are we aiming towards a society where a certain portion, however many, maybe it could be everyone, maybe that's Ryan's take, but a certain portion of individuals are really optimally pursuing the highest heights of value realization? They're acting not just with moral decency, but moral excellence. So what are we striving towards? And I think that asking that question helps us to answer, how do we get there as well? When Ryan refers to a distinction between compassion or duty-based ethics as opposed to health and virtue-based ethics, I'm curious, but it seemed like, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, that you were in some sense equating the duty and compassion-based ethics to a system that uses shame, obligation, maybe even in a pragmatic sense, social punishment or ostracization as a way to kind of direct people morally, where maybe health and flourishing takes a different approach. Is that about what you were suggesting?
Somewhat, yeah. I do tend to associate duty, obligation, rule-based ethics with a kind of negative sort of sin and transgression-based
good choice of words.
framework. I understand they're all slightly different, but I do sort of lump them together oftentimes. I was gonna say, I think, what are we striving toward is a great question. And really, I feel like what I'm advocating for is clarity on that question. Because to me, actions should flow from what I care about, right? And that doesn't mean that I just care about myself, obviously. But if I'm using reason properly and wisdom properly, I should decide which actions to take based on and in proportion to what I care about. And to me, the rule-based ethics is essentially taking actions based on what other people care about or have told you to care about. That's why I suggest that they're dogmatic, is that insofar as it's a rule, whether as opposed to an internally reasoned decision, it may have no real basis. It may not be a good rule. And in fact, yes, there may be experts in the past and society may have decided that these actions are best and they may really be, but they also may be outdated rules that have no basis in wisdom, right? And in fact, I think there have historically been tons of moral rules that haven't had a basis in wisdom, and they've just been kind of outdated superstitions. And so to me, there's no downside to learning how to reason what kind of actions you should take based on what you care about, and discarding with the rules that represent what other people have cared about in the past and wanted you to do.
Go ahead, Mufakhrul. It seems like you have a few thoughts.
I've I really like what you said about e-click and strong link problems. I haven't come across that before, but that's really good framing to think around things. Just to address that, like, quickly, it's becoming more evident to me the more we speak that we need both sets of ethics. In August, if we're looking at a goal in terms of, I'm looking for frame of like societal progression, perhaps more. That's where I'm weighted towards, and Ryan is like more oriented to individual progression. They both feed off each other. They're both mutually beneficial. So, let's, it's about cultivating something. So let's use that analogy. So, I'm advocating for good soil in order for individual flowers to grow in. Right. That's what I'm advocating through my duty-bound ethics. And I'm not saying that duty-bound ethics are the be and end all and everything. I think they're foundational. If they don't exist, then the soil for individuals to grow in is poor. But that's not to say that I don't believe in like personal striving, like Nietzsche did, but not paying attention to the quality of the soil impacts on how far you can strive.
Mm-hmm.
And how far you can strive then feeds back into how much society can progress. So coming back to the weak link, strong link, if we don't pay attention to the soil and we don't pay attention to the direction of growth, well, what we're growing towards, it's guided by values or sort of like ideals that we have, they're mutually dependent, because ultimately the thing that we're both aiming for is just a general progression, getting better. And perhaps my focus is making sure that soil is right for that.
Why?
And Ryan is focusing more on the nutrients required in terms of values, in terms of virtue that drive that growth from the soil. Like, one can't exist without the other. Coming back, so that's one big idea that Ryan can take out and scrutinize a bit more. In terms of no downside, that's an interesting one. So one of the questions I suggested to kick off the conversation was, did Hitler think he was a bad guy? Right. I'm gonna invoke the rule. I forget what it's called. I'm gonna mention the German guy with a interesting mustache. Based on his own values, he was a good guy, good, quote unquote, right? But from my duty-bound ethics, and Ryan would say, if he didn't believe that, it doesn't matter, right? And evidently he didn't. He did things to other people that he would not want doing to himself. He used other people as a means to an end. He did not care about those imperatives, right? That's the downside. That's the downside where societally you can enforce those. I'm and again referring back, people can go off and list loads of arbitrary rules. I'm mainly focusing on those two imperatives that Kant focused on as a starting point. That's the downside. You can act on your own values, but those values can have a disproportionate effect on the greater collective. So this is when those imperatives come into play as safeguards. So that's not to say, for every Hitler you can look at a Isaac Newton, you can look at a Martin Luther King, right? What cringy about Isaac Newton? He was a very nice. Yeah, but guess what? So was Immanuel Kant, right? A lot of intellectuals were, to get that intellectualized, you have to spend a lot of time by yourself, right? So Kant had questionable ideas about race, so that later changed his mind on, seemingly. That's the downside when you're driven by your own values and not having that greater social nudge and social, I forget what the phrase is that is used in terms of social proof. Without having that social proof there, you can pretty much justify anything that you want to do as long as it aligns with your idea of what your values are and what virtues you embody. So those are the two ideas. These ethics are mutually dependent on each other: virtue-based ethics and duty-based ethics. I've frozen up. Can you hear me, guys? Yeah, the video is frozen on my side. So they're mutually dependent. And the second one is there is a downside to having exclusively virtue-based ethics, because who defines whether or not the virtue is beneficial or not, and who to? Is it enough to be beneficial to the individual, or is it important that those virtues, when they're realized, don't harm great society?
Thanks for listening to the Mindform podcast. I'm Ryan A. Bush, founder and author of Designing the Mind and creator of Mindform. Mindform is an exclusive community and training platform for sculpting your psychological software. Members get access to a group of like-minded psychotechs, including all of our guests on this podcast, gamified growth tools, events and retreats, and a collection of transformative programs for mental health and self-mastery. You can learn more and apply to join at mindform.io/podcast. I hope to see you inside.